Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. It's another Breeders' Cup preview. We are looking at the Juvenile FIllies Turf. It's the third race of the Breeders' Cup slate this year. It is the third of 5 races across the Friday card at Keeneland, and it is the 8th of 10 races overall on the Friday card at Keeneland. So, very fun race. I'm excited to dive into it. I think this is a deep, contentious, talented field of fillies. Also, two eligibles I will touch on at the end. But we go a mile here at Keeneland. By history standards, this race could go a multitude of ways. Based off of what we saw in the first running of this at Keeneland, it was a nice wire-to-wire winner in Catch a Glimpse. And then you go back to 2020, Aunt Pearl, also wire-to-wire, but she did it in a much more dazzling manner. She was just much the best on that day. So the Euros always run well in this race, though. That's a fact, and it feels like this is a contentious race that, as much talent as it has, it doesn't really feel like it has a standout, and we'll talk about that right now. Starting with number 1, Comanche Country. She is the West Coast representative for this year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile FIllies Turf. As we know, the West Coast horses tend to struggle in these juvenile turf races in general, in the Breeders' Cup, but the juvenile races, you're always going to see a representative, and never do they run well. In fact, you go through the history, there isn't a filly based in California that has hit the top 3 all the way back since 2013, when Colonel Joan, a maiden nonetheless, was third in this edition. So Comanche Country, 3 wins and 3 starts out west. The Del Mar Juvenile FIllies Turf, which was her stakes debut 2 back, was very impressive. She rallied from well off the pace, just exerted her dominance that day. I was so taken by that performance. And then in the Surfer Girls, she did not back it up. And maybe it's because the speed got away with a little bit more favorable fractions for them and kind of stuck around, given that it was the same horse that set the pace in both races. But it also just felt like she wasn't as good. And I don't know. It's not very exciting to look at a horse who ran their best race 2 back. I want them to be on a clear rising progression, and especially with these 2-year-olds. And I just didn't see that from Comanche Country. So for that reason, I think she's a look against, because that last run just did not match the level she showed at Del Mar, and that's a huge cause for concern. A good filly, but you almost wish she didn't run in the Surfer Girl at this rate. The 2 is Cairo Consort, one of a top 3 from the Natalma that will show up in this field. She was second there as the favorite, nonetheless, and she's done some good work in her career. 2 for 5 lifetime, took her a couple starts to figure things out, and then rattled off 2 straight victories. One did come against Last Call, who of course we'll touch on in a second, and that was who beat her in the Natalma last time out. But she's done very nice things. Stepped out to a mile for the first time in the Grade 1 Natalma, finished up well, and clearly was not against the distance there. But I will say the one concern I had was she really should have had every chance to beat Last Call. I know Last Call maybe didn't run into the wall of horses that Cairo Consort did, but Cairo Consort still had every chance in the world to overcome Last Call down the lane. It's not like there wasn't the opportunity to get past her. It felt like Last Call was better, plain and simple. And of course, there is really not much that separates them in this spot. It's not like Cairo Consort is going to be working out a better trip than Last Call in this spot, or based off that last run has the talent. And then of course it matters how you hold Last Call in regard, but when as long if you're worse than one horse who kind of fits in with the rest of them in this field, there's no telling again. So she just feels like a cut below to me. Speaking of Last Call, felt like we talked about her maybe a little bit more than Cairo Consort, but I think it's worthy because that's who beat her in the Natalma. And at 20 to 1, given it was her first start, it's very easy to look back on these things, but it's also very easy to figure out where this win came from. She's bred for distance, and she finally got it in the Natalma. She took full advantage of it, going a mile for the first time, picked off horses very nicely over the Woodbine turf course, despite not having a pace in front of her, and got the win in impressive fashion, beating Cairo Consort and Laurie, who are both here. And I think one pretty impressive thing is she was behind those 2 most of the race. And while both of them kind of did get caught up in behind horses heading into the stretch, Last Call still lost the most ground, and she still was making up more ground than them. So she's definitely the horse I think you have to take out of that race, and she will definitely like the 2 turns she gets to go here at Keeneland. The track configuration works out nicely for her. I know she didn't really have to pick up into a pace in the last one. It wasn't like the race fell apart and she, picked up the remnants of that. It was more her winning on pure talent, but it feels like that's not going to be capable against this pretty solid field. So that is a concern. She's going to be coming from far back, and she's going to have to make up all the ground. It's, Frankie Dettori is the guy to do it, right? That's the one you'd want to trust to make it happen. But it's still the biggest cause of concern. But the progression is there for last call. Free look is the forward, Chad Brown, of course, not a man to distrust in a Breeders' Cup turf race in general, and especially not in the Juvenile FIllies turf, given his excellent track record in this race. It's almost shocking to think he hasn't won this race since a newspaper record back in 2018, but we know the damage he can do with the right horse. Free look, second in the Miss Grillo last time out. Such a weird race, though, and we'll talk about it with the other two horses that also exit that Miss Grillo. Ironically, they all will break in a line next to each other. This is just the first one we touch on. But the Aqueduct track that day, very yielding, and it was a merry-go-round. I mean, you just were not going to make up anything on that turf course. And Flavio Prat knew that. He just wasn't able to get to the lead. He sat second, and he was never able to wear down the winner, Pleasant Passage. So I almost have to look back on their starts from the summer or early fall as their resume heading into this race. And for Free Look, her win two-back was very strong. That was a maiden win, rallied well from off the pace, was dominant, no doubt win. But 3 starts ago on debut, and I know she was making up all the ground and had a worse trip, but Be Your Best got the better of her. She was just better than her on that day. And once again, I don't think the Miss Grillo is really indicative of the separation between those. So she kind of falls along the same lines of Cairo Consort. Good filly, not in the worst conditions for her, but just feels like she might be a cut below some of her competition. Pleasant Passage is the 5. She is 2 for 2. Broke her maiden very impressively at Saratoga. Was 15-1 that day. And then followed that up with her win in the Miss Grillo, where a very crafty ride from Irad Ortiz Jr. got her to the winner's circle. He knew there was no closing ground on that course at Aqueduct that day. He took full advantage of it, going wire to wire there, holding off Free Look. But she's not a speedy filly by any means. I mean, the race was kind of devoid of pace in general. It worked out very nicely for her to go to the front because she broke well. And she just, slowed things down, walked the dog, however you like to put it, and never looked back. I mean, nobody was gaining or losing ground on that track, so the race was kind of over. But I don't think that's indicative of how good she is. Her maiden race, like I said, we're not going to look more at the Miss Grillo more than we'll look at the starts before. And as good as her maiden win was, it certainly was not the toughest field, whereas I think Be Your Best and Free Look faced some pretty solid fillies in their maiden races. So as we look at these New York fillies, I don't trust the Miss Grillo form at all. I think what they did at Saratoga for each of them is what they actually are. And I think Pleasant Passage is certainly the third best of that. And I think it's kind of funny almost. The morning line definitely reflects that. And I think Nick Tamero got that absolutely right in terms of how the race will play out. I'm not sure if it'll be the betting, but I think for me looking at the race, how it plays out is she's the third best of the New Yorkers. Who I think the best of the New Yorkers is Be Your Best. She did not get the memo. Jose Ortiz had her off the pace. And I can't blame him. I mean, it's hard to get a read, and she didn't break well. She broke towards the outside, and we would have had to really been taken out of her element to make the lead in that race. But she just ran her race. I mean, she didn't make up any ground. She didn't gain any or lose any ground. It was a merry-go-round. It was such a bad race. But the 2 starts before that, it was dominant. Nobody was better than her in the country based off of that win. In the P.G. Johnson especially. I mean, she dominated her first career start and then flushed the field out in the P.G. Johnson. It was such an impressive victory. And the Miss Grillo is just a complete line through. And you take those 2 other races, and she's a huge, huge player in here. I think she has an excellent chance. I think she can work out the right trip over ground she likes. Her turn of foot is wicked, better than any other American in this race. She's going to play some big games in here. I think the Miss Grillo did not work in her favor. I think that the P.G. Johnson is a way better reflection of her true talent. And 7 is Spirit Gal. Pretty weird, actually. We're getting to our first Euro here. There's a handful in here. I think 5 in total, if I'm remembering correctly. And this is the first one we get to. But Spirit Gal is a filly I like. She's 20-1, and I think she'll go a little lower, but still double digits and still a price that you like on top. So for Spirit Gal, 2 really good starts to start her career, but she's taken it up another notch in starts 3 and 4. She broke her maiden in career start number 3. And then last time out, beat the boys in a stakes on the Tapeta, but it doesn't matter. She has good turf experience, going 7/8, and if you watch how she finishes through the line, you'd think the mile around 2 turns will benefit her. She's been around a bend. That race was around a turn. And like I said, she beat the boys. The runner-up in their Cairo came back and won a Group 3 in his next start. So she answered a lot of good questions there. That form is damn good. And I think the best thing is she has speed. She can hop out of there. She can go to the front. She has really good gate speed. And then she travels very strongly on the front. And she doesn't stop. I mean, the pedigree, so much stamina going to be infused. So she checks all these boxes. The real thing will be the race setup. And this is a tricky one to draw up. I obviously, as someone who cares so much about race shape in terms of my handicapping and drawing up the races, literally, I don't like how this race looks because I don't know. But one thing that's consistent with Spirit Gal, that's not consistent with the rest, is the commitment to being on the front. She wants to be there. The horse puts herself in that position. She is ridden to be put in that position. Ricardo Santana picks up the mount. He wants to be an aggressive rider. He's going to put her full throttle. Whereas some of the other horses, we haven't really talked about the other speeds in here. No one, 2 or inside will be in that first 5 or 6, really. When we get to them, you'll realize they've really only led, gone wire to wire, whatever, in 1, maybe 2 of their starts. But the rest, they kind of did the rating thing. So, or they're just not going to be capable of making the lead. So Spirit Gal, I think the commitment to the pace, some really strong runs, pedigree to do this, aggressive rider, it all adds up. I think this filly has a big chance at a big price. I've seen some good mentions of her over the past few days, so we'll see what she goes off at, but it certainly will not be lower than Meditate or some of these Americans like a Free Look, Be Your Best. Some of these others we'll get to, so the price will still be very fair. The 8 is Manhattan Jungle. She stretches out from some sprints that she's been tackling throughout her campaign over in Europe. It'll be the first time she goes around a turn, first time beyond 6 furlongs. So certainly not sure how to read that. Not too often we get to see those types in the Breeders' Cup juvenile turf races around a bend, or 2 turns, I should say, nowadays with the juvenile turf sprint being on the calendar. But this filly, she started her career 3 for 3, got handled pretty easily in the Queen Mary against some fillies that will also be running in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint, and then 3 losses since. And while I will say 2 of her losses were to 2 talented horses, especially in the pre-morning, she lost to Blackbeard, Persian Force, to the Antarctica. No qualms from me losing to them. The last start just wasn't good. It just didn't tell me anything. She might be able to stretch out, but we've seen these Europeans in recent years, these that kind of fit this bill. They're just getting beat in Europe, and it's not like they improve like they might have 15 years ago when they ship over to America. I mean, our American turf horses are just as good as those second-rate, third-rate Europeans, and even some of the first-rate. But point being, she just seems like she is a pretty easy look against here, given her recent form. The 9 is Delight. All the rage after her big victory at Keeneland in the Grade 2 Jessamine in her most recent start. A very crafty ride from Luis Saez. No one wanted to commit to the pace. He did. It helped him get to the wire in front. But I think that played a big part in it. I don't think she would have won by 5 lengths otherwise. The runner-up knocked your socks off. I felt like visually ran every bit as good as Delight did. She just had to make up all the ground when that wasn't working in her favor after missing the break. So I really think this is a good filly. I don't think she's as good as her last race reflects. And I think the speed figure kind of backs it up. This is the one time I think I agree with Beyer. 74 is not impressive. It's not better than anything that the fillies in the Miss Grillo put out. It really does not separate from Comanche Country, which says something, and it's not better than anything from the Natalma. So I think they got this one very right. I think that's very indicative of what that race actually was. It was a race that she tripped out where a lot of riders were shy, and she was full bore. Now, what gets interesting is how she is handled here. I don't know if she's faster than Spirit Gal, but I don't think it'd be a thing where they battle. I think Spirit Gal might be closer to need the lead, whereas Delight, Luis Saez, okay, I see some speed to my inside. Let's rate a little bit. And she can still run a big race. It's just she got handled this, earlier this year at Saratoga by Xigera, won, and then a horse in front of her, and then winning at Delaware doesn't do much for me. And the win in the Jessamine was nice, but I also don't know if there was much to that group. I think it was a fun race. I really enjoyed handicapping it, but the talent's not there. In fact, the horses that have ran back from that have not done well. So there's just too much that went right in the Jessamine for me to think she can be a player here. I think that the Canadian or the runners from the Natalma, including some Canadian fillies, I think the New York fillies and I think some of the Europeans just hold a bigger talent edge over this one. The 10 is Meditate. Meditate, certainly going to garner a lot of attention based off of her profile here. Aidan O'Brien still yet to win this race. I know I'm probably if you've been paying attention to the discussion around this race, I'm the millionth person to mention he's never won this race, but it's true. And Meditate, she's your 4-1 morning line favorite. Makes sense because she's been racing against the best in Europe, and for a while it looked like she was one of the best 2-year-old fillies, if not the best 2-year-old fillies in Europe. She won 4 in a row, did it all right, but then she's dropped 2 in a row. And those are good fillies. You know, Tahira in the Moyglare Stud Stakes and then the Shively Park losing to Lazoo. Fair, but she just clearly was not as good, and I do question her ability to handle this 2-turn mile that she has to take, part in this race. It's just No Nay Never's much better of a sprint sire than he is a distance sire. That's just the facts. And Meditate to me just feels like a short coupled sprinter type, big powerful one, rather than the one that's going to handle these configurations well. So the talent is there, the pedigree not so much. It's a question she absolutely has to answer for me, and at that price I just don't like her doing it. But if you think the distance isn't a problem, she can work out the right trip. She can sit a good tracking trip off the lead and go do the rest from there. She, on pure ability, she's definitely the best in the field. It's just, can she handle what she's going to endure going 2 turns, going around turns in general for the first time, and doing it against this level? I don't think it's possible, but maybe you do. The distance is the one thing holding me back. Laurie, the 11, she's coming off a 3rd in the Natalma. We've already referenced her a couple times, actually. She broke her maiden nicely at Colonial, and then next time out in the Natalma, chased well, but she was clearly 3rd best. Nothing was making her better than Last Call or Cairo Consort, and I just don't get why she couldn't do it, and I think Last Call is just flat out better than her. She has the blinkers. I don't know if that does much for her. Maybe it sharpens her up, puts her in a closer position, but even that, I felt like that last race showed me she was not better than them, and I don't see how she's going to improve better than either of those two heading into this spot. The 12 Midnight Mile, I feel like she might be being overlooked a little bit, given, she's 10-1 morning line, but there hasn't been much discussion about her. She's also No Nay Never, but there's a ton of stamina coming from the dam side, and she looked very good over 7/8 last time out, so I'm a little less concerned about it. She's a big, rangy girl who will handle this just fine. She picked up nicely to win the Group 3 So Sharp at Newmarket last month, a run you just had to have been impressed by, and that was on the backs of a maiden win as well. So she's 2 for 2 in her career. My thing is almost she's going to get going too late. She's going to be picking up at the right time, but it's going to be the too late time. She's not going to be finding the wire quicker than anybody else. And how I draw this race up, she's an off-the-pace type. I think being forwardly placed is the advantage here. And so while she'll be gaining, she'll be chasing speed. That's going to be holding together. So certainly the right resume, and especially at the right price, I just think tactically she's at a big disadvantage. 13, Xigera. And yes, I am saying that right. I learned that that's how we pronounce it this past week, and I still can't believe it, but it makes sense. Xigera. Still trying to train myself to not say Xigera or whatever. Xigera, very solid debut. Actually finished in front of Delight there at Saratoga, the winner of that race, Pink Hue. Nice one for Chad Brown, who unfortunately we haven't seen since. Then second time out, romped. Won by almost 6 very easy lengths, and was being geared down towards the wire by Julian Leparoux. Just did everything right there. And then they tried her on the dirt, and I think the reason she was there is because they weren't going to get in to the Jessamine, I believe was the reason. There was some weird reason as to why she couldn't get into the Jessamine on the grass. So they opted for the Alcibiades, and it worked out. She ran a really good 4th in there. Placed 3rd. She was 4th best on the day. I think we can all acknowledge that. But she ran a very credible race behind 3 fillies that are now going to be in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile fillies, and I think all play a part in what is a very weak race. That's an aside, of course, but I think returning to the turf is good for her. I just don't like the draw. I think she's going to obviously want to sit that pressing trip she's normally sat. It just doesn't work from post 13 over this turf course. You just cannot save ground here if you want to be remotely in the front half of the field. So that's my big knock on her. It's just wide trip is expected. Not going to be able to save much ground. A lot of the other forwardly placed types are just to her inside, so it's not, if she had an inside draw, you'd feel a lot better about her. She'd make a lot more sense, but post 13, just so much work she's going to have to do before the first turn, and even if she does get into the ideal position, she's going to have to exert a lot of energy, and I just don't like that. 14, Basil Martini. She'll wrap things up. Joseph O'Brien for John Velasquez picking up the mount. She exits a Group 3 win, a sharp Group 3 win too. And she actually has been forwardly placed in every single one of her races. Now, we just talked about the form in general. That was her first career win. She dropped 4 in a row. She finished behind Spirit Gal 3 back. And just all in all, it just felt overmatched. And while she did win a Group 3 last out, it was good enough. The field there was not very good. It was kind of a weak group of Irish fillies. So I don't like that aspect. And then finally, her best races have been when she's been able to lead. Which it's kind of weird how much speed we've talked about from these zeros, but that's her forte. She likes to be on the front end, and that's not possible. From post 14, speed to your inside, especially like Xigera, she's gonna basically be a fullback out there, and she's gonna be blocking her the entire way. She's gonna be leading the way. Basil Martini's gonna have to sit off her hip. She's not going to be able to get over, and then there's other speed to the inside further in the draw. So it's just the trip's not going to work out. The quality of competition hasn't been great. She hasn't been dazzling herself. She just feels overmatched. Finally, let's talk about these two also eligibles, just in case they draw in. The 15, Blaine, ran a race in the Jessamine, couldn't get by Delight with that lone speed, but she ran credibly, and I think if there was one horse pressing Delight, she might have been able to take advantage of that. Her turf win in her maiden breaking effort 2 back was very strong. So there's certainly some positives, but from an outside post, I think there's nothing to it. And then Alluring Angel, she got caught in the Miss Grillo on that terrible track, trying to come from last. So, I mean, that was a complete non-starter. 2 really good starts before that, including losing by just a nose in the stakes at Kentucky Downs. I think if she does get in, I love the idea of her dropping in and making one big run, maybe being a potential not an upset chance, but she can hit the board at a big outside price. She has the talent, and that last race is not indicative of her true ability like so many of the others from the Miss Grillo. So with that, my choice is going to be Spirit Gal. Break hard, use your speed, go to the front, don't look back, use your stamina to stretch you the mile that you need to go here. I think she's very intriguing at a price. And then be your best too. I think 7-6, those are my numbers, and I'm going to run with it. I think if Spirit Gal gets pressed just hard enough to soften and back out, Be Your Best is absolutely the one I like to pick up the pieces. Look past the Miss Grillo, go on the pure talent from those first 2 races, and hope she can run a big one. So that's it for this Juvenile Fillies turf preview. Lots of talent in here. Love all these horses. They all have knocks too. You can certainly find a reason to look against some of the fillies in this race. They've all proven beatable, and those that haven't proven beatable haven't looked that great either. So it's going to be a fun race. Really excited. Part of a very fun Future Stars Friday event. We'll see you next time here on Racing Rundown for more Breeders' Cup previews.